Chris Philp, the Shadow Home Minister. And yeah, there he is, fantastic. Great to see you. Can you see us as well? And can you hear us?
Good afternoon. I can hear you and I can see you.
We're in business, everybody. Well, look, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I hope you were listening there too, to the Policing and Crime Minister. I'll hand it over to you, and then when you're finished, we'll do some questions with everyone here, okay?
Brilliant. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Over to you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, look, good afternoon. I'm joining you here from Westminster. Sorry that I can't be with you in person. Look, I'd just like to start by saying something which I'm sure Sarah Jones said as well, but as the Shadow Home Secretary and a former Policing Minister, I'd like to start by saying thank you to everybody here, to you and to the men and women under your command for the work you do every day, keeping the rest of us safe. I know that policing is a job like almost no other, where every day you don't quite know if you're going to come back to your family without having suffered some kind of injury. And particularly at this time of year, with the police memorial service taking place in a couple of weeks' time, I think it's in Coventry this year. It's a time when we remember, I think it's 5,000 officers over past decades who have lost their lives in the line of service. We particularly think about that at this time of year. And, I've seen that in London and in Croydon. I happen to be a Croydon MP as well, like Sarah. And I also attended the unveiling of the memorial to Sergeant Matt Ratana, who was murdered in the Windmill Road custody centre in Croydon 2 or 3 years ago. And I think particularly when you see a local officer killed in the line of duty, murdered in the line of duty like that, it really brings home to us in Parliament how officers make those sacrifices. So I think I'd like to start with a thank you for the service that you and your officers give the public and the country. Thank you. The second point I would like to make is about resources, which I know is very important. No public service, including the police, can do its job properly without the right levels of resources. And I know funding has always been tight, but I think it is now, this year, this financial year, much more difficult than it has been in the past. The Conservatives left office over just a year and a half ago with record numbers of police officers, 149,769 by headcount as of March 31st, 2024. That's the highest number we've ever had. But unfortunately, since then, numbers have dropped by over 1,000. And according to Gavin Stevens at the National Police Chief Council and according to Mark Rowley at the Met and others, the numbers will unfortunately fall even further this year, particularly in the Metropolitan Police, where Mark Rowley, the Commissioner, says the Met will lose a further 1,500 officers and 200 police staff this year. But other forces around the country are going to suffer reductions as well, because the budget that's been set for this year by the government isn't enough to keep pace with the various pressures, inflationary pressures and so on, which means many forces besides just the Met will actually shrink, even though the challenges are greater than they ever have been. I'm also aware that there are some particular individual forces which, because of the funding formula, which needs updating, aren't being properly looked after. I think Lincolnshire has a particularly acute problem, but other forces like, I think, Bedfordshire, Essex, Dorset, and various others have particular challenges as well. So if there was a new formula that was kind of ready to go just before the election, if the new government wanted to bring forward a new formula, providing it was done equitably and sensibly, that is something in principle we would support, because I know there are forces that are struggling very seriously. But I know in general, the resources that went into policing this year, this current year, 25-26, are not enough to meet the demands being made on officers. And I know that Pay is an issue. I know when I was police minister, we had a 7% pay increase, but I know even with that and the ones subsequently, there are still issues with pay. So all of that is something that I'm very conscious of, and I'll keep pressing the government on. The neighbourhood policing guarantee, which Sarah Jones referred to a moment ago, I fear there is a strong element of smoke and mirrors to that, because as you're probably aware from your own local areas, what is essentially happening is that total police numbers are dropping, and they are simply recategorising or reassigning people who were on 999 response or on investigation duties, or in the case of the Met, on schools duties. They're reassigning them to neighbourhoods and saying, oh, look, neighbourhood numbers have gone up. But in fact, it's just a reassignment of officers at a time when total numbers are falling. So I will definitely be holding the government to account for that sleight of hand or the smoke and mirrors which accompanies the neighbourhood policing guarantee, which is just moving things around while actually things get smaller and fewer. Speaking of staff numbers and recruitment, I know that because so many officers have been recently recruited, I think it's something like a third of officers, somewhere in the region of 50,000 officers, have been recruited in the last 5 years. That does mean, as of course you all know, the workforce is on average less experienced than you would like, and therefore retaining more experienced officers beyond the 30-year point particularly makes sense for the next few years when their experience is needed more than ever. But of course, the pension arrangements make that nobody wants to stay beyond 30 years unless there's some arrangement on the pension. And at the moment, that comes directly out of the local police budget. So I think there is a case to look at the abatement arrangements so that if an officer, experienced officer at any rank, needs to stay, it would benefit the force to stay on beyond 30 years, maybe for 2, 3, 4 years longer, then I think an arrangement should be made where that can be done without the police force having to basically fund the pension, because it's the same. It makes no difference to the government whether that officer stays in the police and draws a pension, or whether they go and get a job somewhere else and draw a pension. That officer will still get replaced if they leave. So it makes no difference to the government or the taxpayer, and yet it means we are losing these experienced officers at the very moment when their experience is needed more than ever. So that is something I definitely want to press the government on as well. It's something we were looking at a year or two ago, and I think it is relevant now more than ever. Now, having said all of that about resources, of course, it is important to make sure that we do make the most of the resources we have available. And there is probably still quite a lot of bureaucracy that can be stripped back. I'd be interested to hear, maybe someone in questions can comment on this from your perspective in your force areas. But the rollout of Right Care, Right Person to put mental health work back to the NHS, I think, is important, where, of course, there is no threat to public safety and no criminality. That should have rolled out nationally fully by now. I think, for example, in the Met, it has rolled out. But beyond that, it may be a bit patchy. And that, when fully rolled out, and adopting the model that was pioneered in Humberside, that will save over 1 million hours a year of police time that would otherwise be spent doing what is essentially health work. And we can't have officers waiting, response officers waiting for 12 hours at A&E waiting to hand someone over. That's a complete waste of police time. So I'd be very interested to hear how that rollout is going on the ground, because that does need to happen. I'm doing some work now looking at other bits of bureaucracy which basically waste or use up unnecessarily police time. DG6 is certainly one of those areas. I did try as police minister to persuade the Director of Public Prosecutions to relax the requirements of DG6. I was not successful in doing that, but that is something I want to continue to press. And maybe that's something that Parliament needs to legislate on if the DPP is not willing to relax that. I think there are bits of paperwork like use of force forms, which are frankly excessive. They're used even where no force is used. We've discussed in the past, I think, redaction and the burdens that imposes, redacting case files, even where the case is not going to be charged. That wastes a lot of time. Although, as Sarah mentioned, there are now AI solutions, for example, Rivian, that can automate that. I also think it would save a lot of time and speed things up if the police could take more charging decisions rather than having the CPS take the charging decision, which introduces delay. I'm thinking particularly of things like common assault with a domestic abuse element or domestic violence element. That could probably be police charged, and probably some other things as well. That would really speed things up. I'm also conscious of time wasted on non-crime hate incidents where there is no threat of imminent criminality. That wastes quite a lot of time. And in fact, we in opposition have tabled amendments to essentially abolish non-crime hate incidents. I suspect. So I think that I think I saw the Commissioner and Gavin Stevens and Andy Marsh from the College of Policing recommending just a few days ago in a letter to the Home Office that the NCHI should be abolished. And we have an amendment we're going to put down along those lines in the House of Lords. We lost in the Commons. We'll try again in the Lords this autumn to get rid of them completely. So it would fall just under the regular national standards for incident recording. So stuff is only recorded where it is necessary for preventing or detecting crime. And clearly there's been a bit of criticism of the police for getting involved in cases that are clearly either nowhere near the criminal threshold, which probably not only wastes a bit of time but also undermines reputation. So that is an area where we can maybe help by just getting those things expunged from the guidance entirely. And that will, of course, I hope, free up time to focus on what is most important, which is catching criminals and protecting the public. One area I think we need to collectively do better is the proportion of reported crime that is solved, which is it's gone up a little bit in the last 2 or 3 years, but it's still, I think, only about 8%. Obviously, it varies a great deal by crime type, but it also varies between force. The bottom two forces, which are the two largest urban forces, only have clear-out rates of 5 or 6%, whereas the top forces have like 15, 16, 17%. So there's a lot of variation. And I would definitely just urge crime investigation and detection and prosecution as a real priority, which will, I think, help build public confidence. And one of the areas where I think we can be helped in that is the use of technology. And you'll have heard Sarah Jones, my successor, but one as police minister, referring to that a few minutes ago. On that, I think there's like unanimity between the government and us in opposition now. And technology like live facial recognition that I've talked about before, I think will have a transformative effect, and actually retrospective facial recognition will have a transformative effect on crime detection in the way that fingerprints did 120, 130 years ago, and DNA did 40 odd years ago. Obviously, retrospective facial recognition is being widely used, but I think it could be used more. So every crime scene image can get run through the PND for a match, and live facial recognition, I think, really is only in its sort of infancy. But from what I've seen of its deployment in the Met and Essex and elsewhere, it is catching criminals wandering around town centres who would otherwise not be caught. It was particularly trialled at my request in Croydon Town Centre, where about 200 arrests have been made in the last year or so, only being deployed once a week. It hasn't been used very intensively, but it's caught people who are wanted, who haven't been otherwise caught, who happen to be wandering around Croydon Town Centre, including a man wanted for a double rape dating back to 2017, loads of people who failed to attend court, people wanted for GBH with intent, Class A drug supply, domestic burglary, fraud, firearms possession, the list goes on, who would not have been caught but for the use of live facial recognition. So I think we put some extra money into some more vans a year or so ago, which I think are now available. So I definitely urge you to use that technology. And in Croydon, actually, it's worked so well to avoid needing vans. They're actually in the process of putting in fixed LFR cameras, like on lampposts, so it can be used routinely without needing to deploy a van. So I would just very strongly commend the work on LFR. I would finally say that in terms of supporting the police, I know that a lot of officers feel they don't get the support needed when they use police powers to protect the public. I'm thinking about things like stop and search, use of force, tactical contact, high-speed pursuit, and ultimately the discharge of a firearm. And I'm deeply concerned that the way the IOPC has sometimes gone after officers for misconduct, or in some cases even criminal prosecution, has been excessive. I've made this point repeatedly to the new Director General of the IPC, Rachel Watson, and made the point that the public interest is not served if police officers feel they have to hold back because they're worried about getting busted for misconduct or gross misconduct. That doesn't serve the public interest if officers don't use those powers where they are reasonably needed. Of course, they've got to be used lawfully, they can't be used recklessly, but I think the pendulum, the balance is in the wrong place. And again, just talking to local officers in Croydon, they're nervous about using stop and search, for example, because of the potential ramifications. So partly that's just about leadership locally, giving officers confidence to use those powers, but it's also about the IOPC behaving more reasonably. Rachel Watson has told me they will take a better approach than they have in the past. We'll see if that plays out in practice. But I also think we may need to further change the guidance to make clear that, for example, if an officer follows their training, then that they should be, if they do that, they should be immune from misconduct or criminal proceedings. I do think the balance is in the wrong place. It's not just firearms, it's all of those other things as well. And I think the officers on the front line need to know that, people, politicians, the system as a whole, the IOPC, and their commanding officers will support them where they act reasonably to protect the public. We need them to feel able they can do that. And really, I think, I always took the view when I was police minister and now as Shadow Home Secretary, that the police do a vital job in protecting the public and society. Society wouldn't function without the work you and your officers do. And so I think it's therefore incumbent on us in Parliament to do everything needed to support you in terms of resourcing, and I know there's more needed, and backing the police where they do take action to protect the public. That is always what I tried to do in the past as police minister. I'm sure I didn't always get it perfectly right, but it's what I tried to do, and it's certainly what I'm going to continue trying to do as Shadow Home Secretary. So let me just conclude where I started. Thank you for everything you're doing to protect the public, and I will do everything I possibly can in Parliament to make sure you have my support as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris.